chemicals in our food, water, and air are fueling the rise of one of the world's fastest growing brain diseases. For 99% of human history, Parkinson's disease was extraordinarily rare, if not non-existent. I think one of the problems in American medicine, we go from disease to treatment. But we need to ask why. Most of these diseases have their roots in our environment. If we clean up our environment, we make it so that people can live into their 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s without giving Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease.
So you're saying that dry cleaning chemicals are implicated in higher incidence of Parkinson?
These chemicals in a small twin study were associated with a 500% increased risk of Parkinson's.
Dr. Ray Dorsey is a professor of neurology at the University of Rochester and the director of the Center for Brain and Environment at Atria Health and Research Institute. For the past decade, he has pioneered technology to care for individuals with Parkinson's disease. I want to start off by talking about, first and foremost, what Parkinson's disease actually is. Can you share that for us?
Yeah, so Parkinson's disease classically is a brain disease that causes at least two of the following four symptoms. One is a tremor. That's probably what most people know, usually in the hands, usually asymmetric. Second is slowness of movement. Third is stiffness or rigidity. And fourth is difficulties with walking and balance. And unlike other neurological diseases like seizures and strokes and migraines, which have been described for centuries, if not millennia, the first major description of Parkinson's disease did not happen until 1817, when a 61-year-old British surgeon named Dr. James Parkinson saw something new on the streets of London. And what he saw was new wasn't tremor, which has been described for many years. Shakespeare even talks about it. But he saw people with a slow and shuffling gait, a stooped posture, and this propensity to walk faster and faster. And he called it the shaking palsy. He also said this has not been classified in the medical literature before. And he described 6 people, at least 5 of whom were men, all older with the disease. Fast forward 2 centuries later, in 2017, the global burden of disease estimates that 6 million people worldwide have the disease. So you go for something that's rare, that's not classified in the medical literature, that catches the eyes of a 61-year-old surgeon in London, to 6 million in the span of just 2 centuries. And so why is that? And so I've been thinking about that, and there are a couple of possible explanations. One, genes, but genes don't change. Our genes don't change that much in 200 years. Second one, which a lot of people talk about, is aging. And indeed, people are living longer now than they did 200 years ago. But if you look at the growth adjusted for age, it's still one of the world's fastest growing brain diseases. And then I think it leads you to the conclusion that it's our environment, that chemicals in our food, water, and air are fueling the rise of one of the world's fastest growing brain diseases.
Yeah, you actually shared, and it just really stood out to me in the book, which is, the book is remarkable. The Parkinson's Plan is the new book. Everybody needs to pick up a copy like yesterday. And you said that Parkinson's, you believe, is a man-made disease.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
So in 1971, a really smart epidemiologist, Abdul Omran from Egypt, was interested in what drives population growth. And for most of human history, where Homo sapiens has been around for about 200,000 or 300,000 years, we've been relatively few. And for most of human history, he said, population growth was limited by food, when hunter-gatherers were limited in growth because there just wasn't enough food. And then we had 10,000 years ago the agrarian revolution, which led to excess agriculture production, the ability to store food, the formation of cities, and huge population growth. But it also led to infectious pandemics, bubonic plague, smallpox, and the like. So that was what was limiting human growth. And then in this third generation, he said we live in the era of degenerative and man-made diseases. So he said in 1971 that we live in an era of degenerative and man-made diseases. And so what's a man-made disease? So the poster child for a man-made disease is lung cancer. So if you look at lung cancer deaths in the United States in 1900, it's almost non-existent. There's almost no lung cancer. Indeed, it was so rare that medical students and doctors would gather around thinking that they would never see another case. They called it a once-in-a-lifetime oddity. Unfortunately, they were wrong, because 25 years after cigarettes were introduced into the United States, you saw a corresponding rise in lung cancer deaths. Smoking in the United States, California, peaked in the 1970s. And as soon as we stopped smoking, 25 years after we stopped smoking, we see a corresponding decrease. Still today, over 80% of lung cancer is due to smoking. Lung cancer is the leading cause of cancer death in the United States and the leading cause of cancer death in the world. And the vast majority of it's man-made. We could just live in a world where lung cancer is extraordinarily rare. So what are other ones? I'll give you another one. Acne. So 3/4 of American teenagers have acne. And I asked one of my good friends, Dr. Mary Gail Mercurio in Rochester, hey, Mary Gail, what's up with acne? What's the point of 3/4 of teenagers getting the skin condition? She said, it could be a disease of Western civilization. And so she pointed me to this paper, I think in the Archives of Dermatology, and they said, is acne a disease of Western civilization? And so they looked at hunter-gatherer populations in Papua New Guinea and Paraguay, looked at 101 cohort and over 1,000 in another cohort, including teenagers. You know how many cases of acne they found?
Please tell me. None.
No acne.
Huh.
So I'm not a dermatologist, and the authors weren't sure, but they said, high levels of insulin, Western highly processed diet, high levels of insulin leading to cellular proliferation, leading to acne. Again, I'm not an acne expert, but here it is, a disease that just didn't exist in the past and still doesn't exist in certain populations in the world. And so, type 2 diabetes, we go down the line. And then so we argue in our first book that Parkinson's disease, based on the research of my colleague, Dr. Caroline Tanner at University of California, San Francisco, is due to environmental causes, certain pesticides, dry cleaning chemicals, if you can believe it, and air pollution. And these three major groups of environmental toxicants are likely fueling the rise of Parkinson's disease. We get rid of these toxicants, we get rid of Parkinson's disease, we make it rare like it was for 99% of human history. Parkinson's disease was extraordinarily rare, if not non-existent. We could do the same thing again.
Yeah. Oh, I had no idea we're going to talk about some of these other subjects. I just want to pivot back to the acne thing really quickly, because, if you think about this, our skin is also a major endpoint for detoxification as well. So even beyond the diet, just the things that we're exposed to, the things that we're putting in and on our bodies, and having this route to try to get out of our system. I remember when I was a kid, but it was just so normalized, right? And so my mom would call them sex bumps, right? Which sounds kind of weird now looking back on it, but it's just what teenagers go through as their hormones are changing, right? But we have cultures that this isn't a thing.
Doesn't exist.
Oh my goodness gracious. And so specifically looking at Parkinson's, why is Parkinson's? What are the things that you've identified in your research that are contributing specifically to this condition?
So, your brain is 2% of your body mass, 20% of your energy consumption, and most of that energy consumption is from nerve cells, neurons. So your brain's a gas-guzzling thing. It's hyperactive even when we're sleeping. It's active and consuming lots of amounts of glucose. So nerve cells many of them are chock full of the energy-producing parts of nerve cells are called mitochondria. And some of our nerve cells are really long. I'm a tall guy, so I have a nerve cell that, goes from my spinal cord all the way down to my toe, and that's, a meter in length, 3 feet in length. And you have another one that goes from your brain all the way down to your spinal cord. So you have these nerve cells that are really long and have huge energy consumptions. You can imagine, to maintain a 3 foot long nerve cell, you got to have a lot of energy production. And it turns out that all these chemicals that are linked to Parkinson's disease all damage the energy producing parts of cells. So there's a common mechanism. They're different chemicals, but they all share this common feature that they all target the energy producing parts of nerve cells or of cells in general. Turns out there are some rare genetic forms of Parkinson's disease. About 12% of people in the United States have a genetic cause or genetic risk factor of the disease. Those genetic causes also damage the energy producing parts of cells. Indeed, one of the most common genetic cause of Parkinson's disease is called a mutation in a gene called LRRK2. It produces the dry cleaning chemical trichloroethylene, produces the same biological effect as the genetic cause. They both increase the activity of a protein. It's called LRRK2. And so the genetic cause increases the activity of this protein, and this chemical increases the activity of this protein. Dr. Brianna D. Miranda and her colleagues at University of Alabama in Birmingham have demonstrated this. So basically, we have these environmental chemicals that are are also damaging the mitochondria, the energy-producing parts of cells, just like the genetic causes do as well.
So you're saying that certain dry cleaning chemicals are implicated in higher incidence of Parkinson's?
Yeah, let me show you the chemical. So you got your bachelor's in science, so you know a little chemistry. And so your listeners know water is made of 3 atoms, H2O, 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. So this is one of the dry cleaning chemicals. It's trichloroethylene. It's made up of a whopping 6 atoms, right? 2 carbons in black, 1 hydrogen in white, and 3 chlorine atoms in blue, hence its name trichloroethylene. It's got a cousin that's commonly used in dry cleaning today. It's called perchloroethylene. It's got 1 additional chlorine atom instead of hydrogen atom. And these chemicals in a small twin study were associated with a 500% increased risk of Parkinson's. 500% increased risk of Parkinson's disease. One small study in Denmark looked at the rate of Parkinson's among female dry cleaning workers. They looked at different workers who are trying to figure out which occupations are linked to Parkinson's disease. The occupation that had the highest risk of Parkinson's disease was female dry cleaning workers, 15 times increased risk of developing Parkinson's. 15 times, not 15%, 1,500%, 1,400% increased risk of it. Now, it's a small study, really small. If you expose laboratory animals to this, it damages the energy-producing parts of nerve cells, and it damages the dopamine-producing nerve cells that are lost in Parkinson's disease. This chemical, some people have heard about the marine base Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. Maybe if you see these commercials. So it turned out that the marine base at Camp Lejeune was contaminated with this chemical from a dry cleaner on the base called ABC Dry Cleaners. You can't make this stuff up. ABC Dry Cleaners inappropriately disposal of trichloroethylene. It gets into the water supply at the marine base in North Carolina. So Marines are usually trained at either Camp Lejeune in North Carolina or Camp Pendleton in California. And from 1953 to 1987, the Marines were drinking water that was contaminated with this chemical. And for the latter years, the Marines knew about it. And this chemical is known to cause cancer. That's the opinion of the World Health Organization, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Health and Human Services. And it increases the risk of Parkinson's disease. They looked at the rates of Parkinson's disease among Marines who served at Camp Lejeune versus Marines who served at Camp Pendleton. So the Marines, by and large, are healthy. They're young, on average, ages 20. And they're at a Marine base only for 25 months on average. Yet 35 years later, the Marines at Camp Lejeune had a 70% increased risk of developing Parkinson's disease.
Oh my gosh, man. Oh, this is heartbreaking. And first of all, you're a man after my own heart, pulling out a molecule model right out of his pocket. That was awesome. And just to really give this some substance, because when I think about, dry cleaning, like this is just such a normal part of our everyday lives. And it doesn't appear to be anything nefarious about it. It's just a service that's available, but it's invisible. It's one of those things that we don't really think about. What are they using to clean the clothes? Like, what is a part of this whole process? And you're kind of exposing this and sharing, like, we need to do something different because this is harming our health.
Yeah. And so how does Parkinson's become the world's fastest growing brain disease? Well, you get chemicals like this that are everywhere. So in 1970, 500 million pounds, 2 pounds per American were produced of this. You would find this in typewriter correction fluid. It was used to decaffeinate coffee. So if you drank decaffeinated coffee in the 1970s, you may have been drinking this. This was used as an anesthetic agent for pregnant women to relieve pain. There's actually one study, so people ask me, well, what about the pregnant women? There's actually one study that suggested anesthesiologists have a higher risk of Parkinson's disease. And then it's inappropriately disposed of, so it gets into the groundwater. Up to 30% of groundwater in the United States is contaminated with this chemical. It's contaminated groundwater, at least I think on 5 different continents. And then like radon, I don't know if you know radon, evaporates from the soil and enters your home and can cause lung cancer. It turns out trichloroethylene is very volatile. It rarely evaporates, hence its use in dry cleaning. And it can evaporate from underlying groundwater and soil and enter people's homes, workplaces, and schools completely undetected. Can I tell you a story? This thing's everywhere. It's in Southern California. Can I read you a little bit?
Please do. Please do.
So I'll read you the story. So this vapor intrusion is invisible, as you were pointing out, and it's everywhere. And so I'm going to read you a story. So this is from our book on the chapter. It's called An Invisible Cause Inside Our Homes. This section is At the Corner of Health and Happiness. After several years of investigating trichloroethylene, abbreviated TCE's role in Parkinson's, Ray began thinking that the chemical might be everywhere. He thought of the least likely place to be contaminated, Newport Beach, California. So Ray, who went to high school in the beautiful coastal town, Googled trichloroethylene plus Newport Beach. What he found shocked him. Not only was there a contaminated site in the wealthy city, but was just a quarter-mile away from his alma mater. With its year-round sunny skies, strong universities, and entrepreneurial spirit, Southern California has long been a major hub of the aerospace industry. During World War II, the region employed 2 million aerospace workers and produced 300,000 airplanes. In the 1980s, one-third of the nation's aerospace engineers were located in the region. In 1957, a large aerospace unit opened in Newport Beach to conduct, quote, research, engineering, and manufacture of missile guidance components, rocket motors, and computer hardware. Not surprisingly, the work generated a lot of grease, which was easily and conveniently cleaned with chemicals like TCE and PC. So in addition to dry cleaning, these chemicals are widely used to degrease metal. Following the end of the World War in the early 1990s, the end of the Cold War, in the early 1990s, the aerospace industry shrank, and the plant, located 3 miles from the Pacific Ocean, closed its doors. When the facility was demolished, TCE and PCE were found in the soil and groundwater, and cleanup efforts began until 1996. This land was subsequently rezoned from industrial to residential use. However, the remediation was not complete, and the pollution did not just disappear. In the early 2000s, TCE and PCE were still found in the soil vapor and shallow groundwater. This did not raise health concerns, at least at this time, perhaps because the water was not being used for drinking. By 2017, the Santa Ana Water Board, however, had become concerned that TCE and PC vapors could migrate and enter the homes of churches and other buildings in the area. Scores of monitoring wells were placed throughout the region. So these are monitoring wells that you can find on the ground if you're looking. And this is one right, my high school, Corona High School, is just there in the background beyond this monitoring well.
Unbelievable.
In multiple wells, the soil gas levels were elevated, in some cases 100 times above screening levels. Among the locations near the wells were homes close to the corner of La Salud, Spanish for health, and La Felicidad, Spanish for happiness. Beginning in 2018, the indoor air of homes in Newport Beach was tested, and TCE and PCE were found above screening levels for about a third of the approximately 390 homes sampled. So over 100 homes in Newport Beach, California, with unsafe levels of TCE and PCE. Elevated concentrations were found in bedrooms, living rooms, and in kids' playrooms. In 29 of these homes, vapor intrusion was thought to occur based on property-specific evaluations. The remedy offered to remove these cancer-causing chemicals in the indoor air of people's homes has included both air purifiers and remediation systems. Despite the extensive contamination, many in the community remain unaware of the risk. Catherine Kelligan, a lifelong resident of Newport Beach, learned of the pollution by listening to a podcast featuring Ray as a guest. When her hometown was mentioned, her ears perked up. While she never lived in the area that was formerly occupied by the aerospace company, her friends did. She spent many afternoons and nights there. She also recalled the whispers of cancer in the community that affected numerous parents of her classmates. It was, quote, it was known that people in that neighborhood got cancer. Everyone thought it was due to a landfill, but the nearest one Ray could locate was miles away. Today, she sees solutions such as testing and remediation as accessible. She says that most residents can readily afford $1,000 or $2,000 to remediate their homes, but no one is telling them about breast cancer or Parkinson's. Her fiancé, Harrison Avisto, echoes Catherine's impressions. He recently asked a friend who grew up in the affected neighborhood whether he had heard about the contamination. He said, "Oh, yeah. Tons of people talked about it, and the soil was tested super often. There were higher levels of chemicals in certain areas, and there were tons of cancer cases in the neighborhood." Harrison says, if this is happening in one of the most beautiful, affluent areas, what does it mean for other areas?
Yeah. So number one, this is insidious.
Yes.
It's not just something that's associated with, I think it's more of a concentrated exposure if we're talking about the dry cleaning industry, but it's been integrated into so many things that it have become just a normal part of our lives. And also, am I hearing like its ability to be broken down is very difficult. Would this be in this category of PFAS chemicals by chance?
So it's not like a forever chemical, but it slowly breaks down. It can hang out for years. So this aerospace industry shut down in the 1980s or 1990s, and yet in 2018, they're finding unsafe levels 30, 40 years in people's homes. It begs the question, what's been going on for the decades before then,
right,
when the concentrations were even higher? And again, it's known to cause cancer. So, we know cancer rates in the United States are going, for people under 50, it's going up. Diseases have reasons. They don't just happen. They have reasons. And the reasons that why people are getting cancer, I think, is trichloroethylene. I think one of the reasons that Parkinson's is one of the world's fastest growing brain diseases is trichloroethylene and perchloroethylene.
Yeah. We're unknowingly stacking conditions against ourselves.
Yes.
And so, like, as you mentioned, just seeing so many of these newly invented chemical complexes being vehemently stamped as carcinogenic to humans, there's so many of them and they're in so many different things, it's very difficult to escape them. And so this work in putting together the Parkinson's plan, you're addressing the biggest culprits. And also, number one, your work is about prevention. Prevention is the most powerful player in this. But also, what can we do to slow the progression? And we've got so many science-backed things that you talk about in the book. The Parkinson's 25,
yes,
for instance. Can you talk a little bit about that? What was the Parkinson's 25?
Yeah, so if chemicals are causing these diseases, then these diseases must be preventable. And so if they're preventable, what can I as an individual, what can I do to take action to reduce my risk of ever getting Parkinson's disease? And if I already have Parkinson's, if I'm one of the 1.2 million Americans with Parkinson's, what are the things that I can do to possibly slow the rate of Parkinson's? So I always got asked this question. And so my colleague, Dr. Michael Oak, and I came up with the Parkinson's 25. 25 actions people can take in their everyday lives to reduce their risk of Parkinson's. And if you already have the disease, possibly slow the progression. And so number one is to wash your produce, even your organic ones. So it turns out there are, in some cases, unsafe residues of pesticides on people's fruit and vegetables. And even organic ones can have, not only can they have residues of pesticides, which begs the question, how are they getting pesticides on them, but can have unsafe levels of them. So I wash all my fruits and vegetables, like apples, for example, in water. It turns out the U.S. Department of Agriculture, when they measure the residues of pesticides, do so after holding it underwater for 15 to 20 seconds. So that's what the safety threshold is, after 15 to 20 seconds. I don't know if anyone's ever held their apple under the faucet for 15 to 20 seconds. And then I add a little bit of soap, because some pesticides are fat soluble, and some of these pesticides can get in fat, and your brain's covered in fat. So I get really most concerned about the pesticides that are fat soluble and what role that they're playing. So I wash it with basically soap and water. You can get a vegetable wash. I get it for like $4 at the grocery store. It lasts me 6 months. Or other studies have suggested that vinegar and salt can do it. So I have a big glass bowl. I put my apples that I buy organic where possible, and I put all my produce in a big bowl. I give them a bath, and I put them, out in the bowl to be eaten at a later time. And so that's one easy thing. We had an air purifier here earlier, so many of these chemicals are inhaled. Trichloroethylene is inhaled, so air purifiers can reduce exposure to particulate matter, can reduce exposure to volatile organic chemicals like trichloroethylene. So that can be done. A water filter on your water, on your faucet at home, can reduce exposure to pesticides or other chemicals in your water. We can talk about golf and, exposure to pesticides. I mean, there are scores of things that we can do to decrease our risk of getting exposed to these chemicals in our everyday life. We put them together in the Parkinson's 25. We have it's almost like a tearaway thing in the back of the book that gives each one of these to be done. Of course, there's only so much we can do as individuals. We can do other things in our community. And if we can get rid of, why are we spraying pesticides on kids' schools and playgrounds? Right? I mean, we talked about, why are we putting soda in kids' schools? Why are we spraying nerve toxins on kids' playgrounds and schools? There are tons and tons of things that we can do in our community to do this. And then fundamentally, we can ban some of the most toxic chemicals. We got rid of lead in paint and lead in gasoline. Today, lead levels in our kids, 95% lower than when we were. Our kids are smarter today because we got rid of lead in paint and lead in gasoline. We should use some of that intelligence to identify other ways to improve our environment, improve our health, so we never have to get these diseases. I mean, who wants to be a patient? Right? Who wants to go to the doctor's office? doctors are nice people, but, people have better things to do. Who wants to get health insurance bills? Why are we spending $50 billion a year on caring for people with Parkinson's disease? And we spend less than $50 million. There are homes in Los Angeles and in Miami, Florida, that are sold for more money than we as a society invest in trying to prevent Parkinson's disease.
Oh, my goodness. Part of any movement has examples, like things that really stand out to people, because so often, like, suffering is a solo act. Like, you don't usually see what's going on behind closed doors. And so my initial exposure to knowing what Parkinson's was, early on, and it was Muhammad Ali, it was Michael J. Fox. And I'm curious because, we attribute certain, this condition to certain things just unconsciously, and I think in particular with Muhammad Ali, and being a boxer and the head trauma and all these different things. So does that play any part? Can trauma, insults to the brain contribute to this condition as well?
So Dr. Michael Oken, with permission of his family, was one of the physicians who helped care for Muhammad Ali, and he wrote a paper in which he said that head trauma may have been contributing to it. I also wonder about, he grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, and in an agriculture area, my understanding. And so I worry, was he exposed to pesticides, inhaling pesticides? And it turns out that head trauma increases your risk of Parkinson's, not surprisingly. Certain pesticides increase your risk of Parkinson's, and the interaction amplifies the risk. Right. So you've talked about this, about the impact of mixtures and of chemicals coming together. And so you're not just exposed to one chemical or one toxin. You're often exposed to many, whether it's air pollution, whether that's cigarette smoke, whether that's pesticides if you're a farmer. And it's likely that sometimes the interaction among these environmental factors could be amplifying the risk and explain why some people exposed to these chemicals develop the disease and why some people exposed to these chemicals don't.
Yeah. And his daughter, Layla Ali, is really good friend. She's been on the show a couple of times, but really, really good friend. And just seeing this progression, of her father, or regression with this disease over time is heartbreaking. And that's another thing that you mentioned. Nobody wants to deal with a disease, but specifically, we don't want to suffer. And this is one of those things that we are suffering needlessly. It's a man-made condition, and there are things that we can do to help defend our bodies against this. And we need to do this stuff right now. And so I want to ask you about some more of these in the Parkinson's 25, if we can. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. One of the other ones, well, since we already mentioned dry cleaning, one of them is dry clean cautiously. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, so the price of, the reason do you know why we dry clean clothes?
Please tell me.
So we dry clean clothes so they don't shrink.
Of course, yeah.
So the price of dry cleaning should not be Parkinson's disease.
Right.
It shouldn't be cancer. So there are green dry cleaners. And California has banned perchloroethylene, the trichloroethylene with the one additional chlorine atom. I think they're phasing it out, or it's already been eliminated. But other places, and in 2024, the United States government banned perchloroethylene with a phase out over 10 years. Hopefully that ban is going to be put into place. But still, 60%, I think, of dry cleaners in the United States still use perchloroethylene. And so I find a green dry cleaner. So when I dry clean clothes, fortunately for men, most shorts are laundered. They're washed in water. But so if you're going to dry clean, use a green dry cleaner, and you can find green dry cleaners. And if you can't get a green dry cleaner, take your clothes and air them out before you bring them into the home. So it turns out when you take the dry cleaning from the store into your car, on your way home, you're breathing in the chemical. When you put it into your closet at home, it's now inside your home and you're breathing it in your home. So take off the bag, air it out before you bring it into the home, so that when it does its off-gassing before it enters your
residence.
How about
before you get into the car?
Yeah, you can do it before you get into the car, too.
Or if you can, again, look for a green dry cleaners.
And that's why I just recently moved to New York City, and I spent couple of days finding a green dry cleaner.
I did the same here. So the dry cleaning that I have done, is a green dry cleaner. And again, it's becoming more prevalent because of this information and people like yourself and especially you really leading the charge on this message.
So that, I say I'm sometimes the PR agent for Dr. Caroline Tanner. So Caroline Tanner is a Parkinson's disease expert who got a PhD in epidemiology from Berkeley because she was a Parkinson's specialist and she was concerned about these environmental causes and she wanted to go at them rigorously. So after doing all her neurology training, after being a neurologist, she went back to get a PhD. I mean, who does that? And so she has quietly, politely, she's this, in my mind, she's like 5'8". She's a giant, but when you meet her, she's like 5 feet tall. And, this most unassuming person has quietly told us for 40 years what the environmental causes of Parkinson's disease are. If we paid attention to her work, we could live in a world where Parkinson's disease is increasingly rare.
It's so powerful. So powerful. Another one is don't poison yourself. Sounds pretty obvious, but again, I don't think we really think about this. And you talk about various insecticides, pesticides, flea collars, ant sprays, and all this stuff in particular.
Sure. So number 11 is don't poison yourself. Sometimes the remedy is worse than the disease. Insects, including fleas, ants, and moths, can be unwanted guests. Unfortunately, some common pesticides can increase the risk of Parkinson's. For example, the pesticide permethrin found in flea collars, ant sprays, mothballs, and outdoor apparel can reduce dopamine-producing nerve cells in laboratory animals. Consider safer alternatives and, if necessary, minimize exposure by wearing a mask, increasing ventilation, and avoid spraying near children. So when I wrote our first book, Ending Parkinson's Disease, I didn't know about these causes of Parkinson's disease. I had heard vaguely about pesticides, but that was about it. So the more research that I did, the more I thought about it. And so I went into our garage when we used to live in Rochester, New York, and I found pesticides linked to Parkinson's disease in my garage. And so here I am, a Parkinson's specialist trying to get people to prevent Parkinson's disease, yet I've been an unknowing consumer of chemicals that are linked to the disease.
Yeah, when I was reading, that was the first time I ever associated a flea collar with these chemicals. Like, I just thought it was magic. When I was a kid, put the little flea collar on Smokey and, it's just, it is what it is. I didn't think about the chemical complex and the off-gassing of that particular device to be able to do what it says it's supposed to do.
Yeah. And, people are spraying it in their lawns. They're spraying it on golf courses. They're spraying it, on medians. It's everywhere.
You mentioned golf courses. So let's talk about this. Another one, mind your greens. So I was like, oh, is he about to talk about spinach? But you were talking about the golf course.
So my colleague, Dr. Brittany Krzyzanowski, who's a geographer, so she maps things, and her colleagues came out with a study last 2 weeks showing that people who live near a golf course, within a mile of a golf course in Rochester, Minnesota, have 124% increased risk of developing Parkinson's. Living within 1 mile of a golf course in Rochester, Minnesota is associated with a 124% increased risk of Parkinson's disease. And why is that? And so it's likely certain pesticides, because pesticides are sprayed on golf courses. I think one study suggested that pesticides per acre are sprayed with 80 times as much pesticides as agricultural areas are. And some of these pesticides, including a pesticide called chlorpyrifos, which used to be found on over half of apples in the United States. So if you've had an apple in the United States, you've likely eaten this pesticide called chlorpyrifos, which damages dopamine-producing nerve cells and has been associated with Parkinson's disease in studies widely used on golf courses. So I think people who are living near golf field courses, the reasons that they might be at higher risk is they're getting exposed to these chemicals. It's almost like secondhand smoke. They're not smoking. They're not applying the pesticides. They're just the innocent bystanders. And, what led to us banning cigarettes, in restaurants and in airplanes, including here beginning in California, was people said if people want to smoke, that's their business. But, I don't want to be at the bar or in the airplane breathing the toxic chemicals that are from somebody else. And so I think this is a great example. There's one study done by Dr. Beata Ritz and Kimberly Paul here in Los Angeles that showed people who simply live near where a certain weed killer called paraquat is sprayed have a doubling of their risk of Parkinson's disease. Simply living near where a weed killer is sprayed doubles your risk of Parkinson's disease. And so I think there are organic golf courses. So why can't we create more organic golf courses? Why can't we ask golf courses to reduce their pesticide use by 50%? Why can't we ask them to use safer alternatives? Some of these pesticides that are being used are from the 1950s and 1960s. You drive in a car and you fly in an airplane. You don't drive in a car from the 1950s or wouldn't step in an airplane from the 1960s. If engineers can come up with safer modes of transportation, chemists can certainly come up with safer pesticides.
Yeah, yeah. We just don't think about it. We see those beautiful greens out there. We don't think about all the careful manicuring and all the stuff that's used, from the weed killers to the insecticides. And, all this stuff, it comes at a cost, so just being mindful of that.
And that's what Rachel Carson wrote about in Silent Spring in 1962. Pesticides like DDT played a role in preventing people from getting malaria. But she was warning about the indiscriminate use of pesticides. Think about pesticides on school playgrounds. Really?
Yeah.
To what end? And so she was worried about the effect on the environment and on birds. So your spring, instead of hearing birds chirp, you'd have a silent spring. She told us in 1962. She even warned us that new diseases would appear in farming communities that would puzzle the doctors in the cities. She was even predicting diseases like Parkinson's would become increasingly common. We listened to Rachel Carson in 1962. We could prevent lots of people from getting intellectual disabilities, from getting ALS, from getting Parkinson's disease, from getting cancer.
This is cracking the door open a little bit on the monetization of diseases, because the information's been out there for quite some time.
Yeah. I think you get to some uncomfortable conclusions. I've been trained at reasonably good in institutions. I'm a reasonably bright guy. How come I didn't know about this for the vast majority of my academic career? How come I wasn't taught? And I think one of the problems in American medicine, listen, it does fantastic things, but we go from disease to treatment. Someone's depressed, antidepressant. Someone's anxious, anti-anxiety medication. Someone's Parkinson's, treat them with medications to treat it. But we need to ask why. So if you go from disease to why, disease to cause, you can, one, identify the underlying cause. Once you identify that underlying cause, it's a lot easier to figure out what the appropriate treatment is for it. You can figure out how to slow the progression. And then most powerfully, you can prevent the disease. So instead of going from type 2 diabetes to a medication, why don't we say what's causing the type 2 diabetes and address that, you've written about and talked about with hundreds of guests on your show. And I think if you find out what the underlying cause of these neurological conditions, why are brain diseases the leading source of disability in the world, more than heart disease, more than cancer, more than infectious diseases, why are the diseases increasingly common? I think you find out that for many of them, they had their roots not so much in our genes. The genetic contributions to Parkinson's are modest. The genetic contributions to ALS are modest. Even the genetic contributions to Alzheimer's disease is in the moderate range. Most of these diseases have their roots in our environment. If we clean up our environment, we make it so that people can live into their 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s without giving Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's. These diseases are not natural consequences of aging. They're unnatural consequences of aging. None of our early presidents, Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, John Adams, age 90, Thomas Jefferson at 83, did not have Alzheimer's disease, did not have Parkinson's disease. Dr. Parkinson in 1817 saying this has not been classified in the medical literature, it's not been around. And that's just 200 years ago. Right. If we clean up our food, water, and air, we create a world where these diseases are increasingly rare instead of increasingly common. We save people, society, lots of money, and we save lots of people suffering, a lot of suffering that's been silent.
How dare you bring so much logic today? I mean, come on. You mentioned chlorpyrifos or chlorpyrifos,
but
either way.
Anyway.
Tomato, but chlorpyrifos is one of those that's been caught up in red tape for years, and we've got multiple studies affirming birth defects, in particular for workers who are exposed to it. We've got data on it being disruptive to microbial genes, and not just our genes, but the genes of our microbes. And it's this kind of, rampant use, in particular with some commodity cash crops, things like coffee. You mentioned coffee earlier and being decaffeinated with another chemical, and then we got these chemicals using growth of it, and people are just drinking a piping hot cup of chemicals, and they're just trying to, have some coffee, and they're just not aware that this is happening.
Can I tell you a chlorpyrifos story?
Go for it.
So Chlorpyrifos used to be used to kill insects, cockroaches in homes in New York City. And this great scientist, Dr. Virginia Rao at Columbia University, she looked at women who were in those households and the outcomes of their children. So one, she found chlorpyrifos in the umbilical cord blood of the children. And then she followed these children forward. And the higher the level of chlorpyrifos in the umbilical cord blood, the lower the IQ at 3, 5, and 7. So we're wondering what's fueling the rise of intellectual disabilities, what's fueling the rise of autism. Why do 1 in 36 children have autism today? I think there are chemicals in our food, water, and air that are fueling the rise of these diseases. We're almost substituting the effects of lead. We got the lead out and we got people's lead levels 95% lower. What a great accomplishment, 95% lower. Kids are smarter, and then we're exposing them to other nerve toxins in the form of pesticides. If we stop this, our kids are smarter. There's less autism. There's less intellectual disabilities. There's less expenditures. There's less suffering. Suffering may be part of the human condition, but needless preventable suffering should not be.
Yes, yes. Since I mentioned coffee, one of the Parkinson's 25 is to have a cup of caffeinated coffee. You specifically said caffeinated coffee. Talk about that one.
Yeah, so this is for the coffee drinkers. It turns out that caffeine may be protective of nerve cells, and that it appears that it's the caffeine, not the coffee. So there have been studies that have associated caffeine consumption with a reduced risk of Parkinson's disease. So if you already drink your caffeinated coffee, this is a reason to continue. Now, caffeine has some other side effects. I'm a neurologist. It can cause headaches. It can cause anxiety. So I wouldn't necessarily start at caffeine. But if you're enjoying your cup of caffeinated coffee, you can continue to do so.
All right. Some people are like, yay, I knew it. Another one of these that I wanted to ask you about was sleep well.
Well, you know far more about this than I do. Your book is outstanding on the topic. And as you point out, a University of Rochester neuroscientist, Macon Neerdegard, has demonstrated that sleep is a key point in time when we flush out toxins through something called the glymphatic system. I was listening to some of your podcasts on the subject last night. And so that sleep, I think 10 times more active, as you pointed out, at night than it is during the daytime. So sleep's a great time to clear out toxins. So if you're working or you're getting exposed to these toxins, it might even be more important. And you know this topic far more than I do, but 8 to 9 hours of sleep can do wonders for clearing out toxins from your brain.
I love it. I love it. And of course, there isn't any aspect of your health that isn't going to be impacted by prioritizing good sleep. But This is another reason, just another check mark for us to make this something that is important.
And it gives you an explanation for why. Yeah. So I think, our grandparents and our grandmas, you need to sleep well. They didn't know necessarily why, but now we have the mechanism by which their advice is proved to be true.
Yeah, yeah. So again, we think about all of these like active things that we need to do, but sometimes we need to be inactive, to slow down, let the body do what it knows how to do already, get out of the way. And it's sleep that there's this powerful mechanism of detoxification that takes place. And we are living in an increasingly toxic environment. And so it's like a superpower. It's our ability to jack into our own charging station and clear out a lot of this waste, give our body the chance, give it a fighting chance to do this work.
Exactly.
Another one of these was exercise. And this one in particular, again, there's a lot of new information coming out on the importance of exercise. Humans have been moving forever. We just kind of stopped. But why in particular? What's the connection with exercise and Parkinson's?
So in the 1890s, one of the top neurologists was Sir William Gowers, and he wrote the Bible of Neurology. And he said for people with Parkinson's disease, the treatment should be a life of quiet rest. He was wrong. So one of the great advances this century is that the benefits of exercise for people with Parkinson's disease. So numerous studies have suggested that vigorous exercise, the equivalent to like 3.5 to 4 hours a week, can not only reduce your risk of ever getting the disease, but can be immensely beneficial. Exercise for people with Parkinson's disease, or just in general, releases growth factors in the brain-derived growth factors that protect the remaining nerve cells that might be damaged in Parkinson's disease. But this exercise thing is just unbelievable in terms of its benefits. There was a study just last week in New England Journal of Medicine that looked at people with colon cancer. So they looked at people who had colon cancer, who had already had surgery and already had chemotherapy. Their average age was 60. They randomized them to get an educational brochure on the benefits of exercise or an exercise training program where they met like once a week with a trainer for an exercise program for 3 years and then follow them out for an average of 8 years. They found that the risk of cancer recurrence among those in the intervention group was 27% lower. The risk of dying in 8 years was 37% lower. The risk of death was 37% lower. If you treated 14 people with colon cancer with the exercise treatment, you prevented 1 death. And the intervention group, they only exercise on average 3 hours extra per week, 3 hours of brisk walking extra per week, and you reduce the risk of cancer recurrence and reduce the risk of death. If this is happening in 60-year-olds who already had colon cancer and have already had surgery and have already had chemotherapy, what does it mean for Parkinson's disease? What does it mean for our health in general? I just think that the evidence is increasingly clear. Dr. Peter Attia says that for neurodegenerative diseases, the first and most effective intervention is exercise, full stop. The benefits are hard to be understated. And you said something also in one of your things about sunlight. And so I tell my kids, and again, I'm not an expert in this, but I tell my kids 3 things. 1, they should be outside. 2, they should be with their friends. They should be social. And 3, they should be physically active. If you're outside, physically active, and social, you guys have enormous health benefits.
Yeah, I love that. And these are epigenetic influences. And now we're existing in this glorified snow globe that's just riddled with newly invented chemicals that are influencing our genes as well. We can proactively influence them in a positive way.
Yes, and we can clear these chemicals up. We got rid of CFCs, we've gotten rid of lead, we've gotten rid of DDT. We've done this time and time again. We need to do the same thing. Our generation right now needs to rise up, make their voices heard, and say, we don't need pesticides on our kids' playgrounds. Thank you very much. We don't need pesticides on our kids' schools. We don't need it on our sports fields. We think golf courses can have 50% less pesticides. We can use safer alternatives. Instead of subsidizing crop production with pesticides, why don't we if we're going to subsidize crops, why don't we subsidize crops without pesticide use? I mean, there are tons and tons of things that we can be doing. $15 billion a year of our taxpayer money is going to subsidize the production of crops using pesticides. Only 1% goes to subsidizing the production of crops that are organic. Shouldn't it be the other way around? If we're going to subsidize anything.
Damn logic. So what can people expect when they pick up a copy of the Parkinson's plan?
We give you constructive solutions. So we paint out, the first half is painting out the problem. What are the chemicals in our food? First, chapter 1, water, chapter 2, indoor air, chapter 3, and outdoor air, chapter 4, that are fueling the rise of Parkinson's disease. And then we talk about how we need to learn why diseases start. So if we learn why diseases start, we can prevent them from happening and more effectively treat them. We need to amplify the voices of those affected. The silence around the suffering needs to end. We need to amplify the voices of Michael J. Fox. We need to amplify the voices of the Ali family. We need to amplify the voices of Davis Finney, of Brian Grant, and the 1.2 million Americans with the disease. And we need to navigate the frontiers of new treatments. And in chapter 10, we give you a plan. We give you 20 steps that we as individuals in our communities and as societies can take to prevent and treat Parkinson's disease. And we have 3 goals. I'll give you an example. In 2013, UNAIDS came up with 3 goals to change the course of HIV. And those goals were 90, 90, and 90. They said that by 2020, 90% of HIV should be diagnosed. 95% of individuals who were diagnosed with HIV should be treated. And 90% of those who are treated should have the virus levels suppressed in their bloodstream. And that way you can prevent HIV. The incidence of HIV today is at its lowest level since 1990. We're in Los Angeles. Magic Johnson, courageous man, shared his story with HIV. Everyone thought he was going to die. But we changed the course of it. HIV is preventable with a condom because we figured out what the cause of the disease is. So in our book, we give you 0, 10, 100. We say that in 10 years when we come back and speak in 2035, that 100% of people with Parkinson's disease will have access to the most effective medication, levodopa, safe, inexpensive, highly effective. If we can give 90% of people with HIV access to expensive, complex medications, why can't we give 100% of people with Parkinson's disease access? By 2035, we will increase research funding tenfold for Parkinson's, and we will increase the proportion focused on preventing the disease tenfold. Right now, out of every Parkinson's research dollar, only 2 pennies, 2 cents, goes to preventing the disease. If we take that from 2 pennies to 2 dimes, we will change the course of this disease. And finally, zero. By 2035, the rise of Parkinson's, the global increase in the incidence of Parkinson's will be 0%. That adjusted for age, we will flatten the rise of Parkinson's disease. So in 2036, we start talking about the fall of Parkinson's disease. And I can't think of a greater gift that, you're focused on health, I'm focused on health, I'm passionate about Parkinson's disease. What a great gift to future generations in the world where Parkinson's disease is increasingly rare instead of increasingly common, where that, maybe when Dr. James Parkinson discusses the thing in 2117, 300 years later, that it again is a rare condition and it's only in the textbook, it's only classified in the medical literature, and it's absent from the world.
This has been phenomenal. I'm so grateful for this conversation. What's the best place for people to pick up a copy?
So they can get it on Amazon, they can get at their favorite books store, or you can just go to our website, pdplan.org. Michael and I are going to devote the vast majority of our proceeds from selling this book to efforts to prevent and treat Parkinson's disease.
Thank you for doing this work. Truly, it just helps me. I feel more at peace knowing that there are people like you who are focused on this specific topic and shining such a bright light and paving a way for a better future. This is powerful. So I really do appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here.
45 million of the currently living Americans are slated to die of Alzheimer's disease if we don't do better with prevention and treatment. It is now the number 2 cause of death in the UK. About 2/3 of the patients are women, about 1/3 are men, and it's the most expensive. The average American will spend $350,000 before dying of Alzheimer's.